Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. I'm sure you guys all just came over from the previous webinar. Before we get started, I'd like to welcome you all to Inform. As you know, it's a 15-hour webinar a day filled with 15-minute sessions. Some housekeeping rules if this is your first webinar of the day. On the right-hand side, we have the chat feature with also questions and polls that you will see. If you have any questions, just put it in the chat section, or even any comments. I will find the right time to interrupt Brett whenever you guys have a question or comment. This webinar will be recorded, and we will share the recording with you within the next few days. But after this webinar is over, just simply stay online and you'll be automatically directed to the next session after this. But now I'll hand it over to Brett.
All right, thank you very much. I'm ready to get started, and we're going to talk about some creativity in forensics, which is something that's not really talked about a lot because it's not analytical. But we're going to talk about analytical stuff as well, adaptability, innovation, and that sort of thing. So we're going to get into some of those things. So the agenda is creative thinking compared to analytical thinking, like I just mentioned, and why I think creative thinking really matters in DFIR. And I think those who have a creative mindset, we all have analytical mindsets. We are methodical, systematic, but if we can add some creativity, we can actually increase our casework, I think, quite a bit better. As far as me, I'm just a practitioner, right? I got some military, police work, forensics, that sort of stuff. So I'm not going to talk about me because this is actually about you. My goal is that you'll be able to take away something from this that you can apply to your cases, the way you're thinking, your investigative mindset, in effect. And the first thing that I want to talk about is find one thing within the next, 50 minutes or 45 minutes of what makes this talk worthwhile to you. And it's going to be something different than somebody else. There may be something that I say that maybe doesn't apply to you, but something else might apply. So I want you to write it down or email it to yourself or tell somebody about it. And there's a reason for that. If you've taken any type of training or presentations from me, I always say, write one thing down, because that's going to allow you to reflect and actually take something away from it without forgetting about it. And I suggest doing this to every webinar class that you ever take, is at least one thing writing down. Now, as far as creativity, what is creativity? In the words of Albert Einstein, creativity is intelligence having fun. And I think that's a pretty good way to describe it, because it's having fun with your thought processes. It's being creative, innovative, thoughtful, and designing things that don't exist yet, solving problems that no one else has solved yet. And you may be thinking, you're not very creative. You can't paint, you can't draw, you can't play music, all those things. And I feel the same way. I can play the radio. That's about it. I can't draw very well. I can use PowerPoint. But let me talk about your brain just in perspective for a minute on how creative you are without even knowing it. And this is just some numbers, nothing to do with forensics besides your brain. Your brain has 86 billion neurons and 100 trillion synaptic connections and 10 quadrillion signals are processed per second, right? And these connections grow and they're pruned dynamically. And if we compare that to the Milky Way galaxy, there's 100 billion stars, right? So there's 20 billion or so more stars in the galaxy than there are the neutrons. But if you look at the how many signals per second all your synapses are doing, 10 quadrillion looks like that. So you have more synapses happening in your brain every second than there are stars in the Milky Way galaxy. And one other comparison I want to do with the space in your brain is that if we look at the mass of your brain, it's 3 to 4 pounds of gray matter, and the mass of the sun is at 4 with a bunch of zeros after it in pounds. So your brain is very effective, and you can be creative, and that's what this is about. Now, analytical thinking. If you're in this field, you have analytical thinking skills. You do it naturally. All our training is based on it. Our processors are based on it. Our tools are based on it. And it's a systematic, methodical processing that we do. We're precise in our exam. We're precise in how we write. We make our decisions based on data, and the things that we do, we want to make sure they're defensible and repeatable, and they're accurate. So that's very systematic. It's like the ruler and a calculator. If I ask you what 2 plus 2 is with a calculator, you can do it with another calculator. You can write it down. It's all going to be the same, 2 plus 2. We're so good at analytical thinking, we break down everything. Just your basic forensic analysis. I mean, if we break it down to just evidence analysis and reporting, I mean, we have 3 things there. We can break that down into 3 things, and we can break those down into 3 things. And that's how we do our systematic, methodical examinations. And we do that very well. And I think that's very necessary and required for this field. But I think we're missing one thing, and that's the creative part of it. So being creative is, coloring outside the lines. Like I mentioned, 2 plus 2 with the calculator is always going to give you 2 plus 2. If I asked you to make a painting and then to copy that painting again, it's not going to be the same because your creativity is going to be a little different. It's going to be unique, which is kind of a negative in this world of forensics because we want something that's repeatable, right? But when you're creative, it's not going to be very repeatable. And it's important to be creative because there's challenges that come up and we have to handle them. And there's no guidelines, SOPs, best practices. We don't know how to handle them. So creativity is what does that. There's new threats, there's innovation of new tools. There's connections in the data that we can't see with their tools. The tools can't connect it, but maybe we can connect it with our brain. And we can communicate better when we're being creative. We can speak and I guess different audiences using different terminology and being creative. So those sort of things are important with being creative. And if you're a musician, you already have some creative aspect that you can drag into the DFIR world. So in opposition of our systematic, where we can break down everything, into 3 parts or 2 parts and repeat it, creative thinking is not like that. It's you're thinking outside the box, new problem solving that you create, solve those problems, non-linear thinking, expansive thinking, right? And innovative, it's just new things that hasn't been done, hasn't been tested or tried, and you're coming up with those ideas, and holistic thinking, which is the big picture, right? It's more than just the data you're looking at the big picture. So there's some problems with that we're going to talk about. But again, I want to emphasize that we need an analytical thinking for sure, right? And creative thinking is going to push it a little bit to the edge of being more effective, right? So you have your left brain and your right brain, and I don't think the science really says one side of the brain is just analytical, one is just creative, but we are more one than the other. And the thing with creative thinking is going to solve problems that analytical thinking cannot, right? And you can see this in cases, let's say in trial, you have the opposing expert. The opposing expert is not seeing what you saw, right? And you can explain it to everybody what you saw. And it's because maybe they were so analytical without any creative thought, they're missing some things. And the creativity is what gives you that extra edge. But there's a huge risk with creative thinking. And let's say over interpreting evidence, right? There's blanks in data. There's things that are missing. I mean, you can look at it, maybe a folder is wiped, right? But it should be there. It's missing. There's blanks there. So you may try to fill in the blanks and overinterpret evidence. And what that does is it maybe false attribution. Instead of John, you thought John did it, but it was actually Mary. Your case can go through rabbit holes, the wrong directions. You can have risk of lawsuits against you or your company or your organization, your reputation. All these things can happen if you overinterpret evidence with creative thinking. But we're going to talk about that. So we don't want to overinterpret because there is some harm to that. Like one example would be you see a benign file, but you think that it's malicious. So you're inferring, oh, that's malicious, without corroborating the evidence, right? So creative thinking is good to come up with ideas, but you still got to cooperate with what? Analytical processing. And there's other things with creative thinking, the risk, deviation from standards. When we're going outside the boundaries of standards, we risk some things from happening, right? If we don't corroborate, verify, and stay within certain bounds. So we're going to talk about some boundaries. Bypassing best practices. Best practices are it's advice. It's guidelines and advice on how to do a certain task that's been tested. But sometimes we might go past best practices because we have an idea of, well, best practice doesn't cover the situation that I'm in, so I'm going to go outside of best practice. So here's what I look at creativity on forensic cases. On one hand, you have an incomplete case if there's no creativity. If you are strictly by the numbers, and there are plenty of us like that, especially in the beginning when you're just following the guidelines. You're absolutely following everything to the T. You're not venturing anywhere into the creativity side. You may have a decent case, but it might be incomplete. On the other hand, if we go too far with the creativity, over-interpreting evidence, going outside the boundaries of some regulations, then we're going to have a bad case. So the way I want to stress with creativity is have a good balance. If you don't have a good balance, that's when you're going to start having a bad case or an incomplete case. Now, I talked about filling in the blanks. Our brain doesn't like to have unknowns. And I think in forensics, everything is practically an unknown. We have so many unknowns, and that's why we're trying to find the information. And when we have unknowns, we tend to fill in the blanks. And you can reflect back even personally. Let's say years prior, you're asked about an event, and maybe you don't remember everything about the event. Your brain might start filling in some blanks there that might not be correct. Witnesses have that problem. When police are interviewing witnesses, if they saw something and if they didn't see something, instinctively they start to fill in the blanks there. And that's just natural. That's just the way that we are. So we want to prevent filling in the blanks when we're being creative, because we're going to have some missing pieces of the puzzle. And there's this spectrum of filling in the blanks. And so, for example, on one end of the spectrum, we have established fact. An example would be matched hash values. And that's where we would love to be on every case. Every case is established facts. But on the other end of the spectrum, we have the impossibility of something. And just an example, I put a suspect was deceased, at the time of the crime. Maybe the suspect was in jail, for a month when this crime or incident happened, or maybe they died a year prior. So it's impossible that suspect did it. So those are the things that we have impossible and established fact. But in the middle of that, that's our analysis. That's our examination. That's our interpretation of evidence. And we have, from highly likely to highly unlikely and everything in between. And this is where cross-examination will hammer you on, is it possible this could happen, or is it likely this happened? And the less information that you have, the harder it is to answer those questions. And if you have a lot of blanks, that's when you start filling in the blanks with things that might be outrageous. Bigfoot, did it, or zombies. And on the other hand, you may have something that's likely. The user account logged in and the user was in his office. So it just depends on what blanks you have that you're going to be filling in instinctively. So we want to avoid filling in blanks without some corroborating evidence. And that's the problem with creativity, is you want to fill in the blanks because you have the missing pieces of evidence, but you end up with conspiracy theories. And this is true to life as well. When we have an incident that happens in the news and there's limited information, we start coming up with, well, maybe it was this or maybe it was that, and we don't have facts. And that's your conspiracy theory. That carries over to your forensic case, because if you start having some conspiracy thoughts of John must have did it because of these other things or these missing pieces, you're gonna look like a conspiracy theorist. So we're going to talk about how to control your conspiracy theories down to factual basis, even when you're critically thinking with some creative thinking. So creative thinking over analytical. There's a question to ask: when, right? When do you want to be creative over analytical? And sometimes it's very clear when you need to be creative. Simply, it's dynamically changing environment. Everything's unknown. You're just being inundated with data. There's trying to predict someone's behavior because something's going on. There's no patterns that anyone can see, no patterns that your tools can find, and even exigent circumstances. So if you have, I want to use a missing child, a kidnapped child, right? You have exigent circumstances. You might have to be creative in how to finding the evidence on whatever device that's going to go outside the bounds of analytics, right? So I'll use a electric guitar as an example of any forensic tool. Instead of picking a tool, I'm just going to use a guitar. And again, the only musical instrument that I can play is the radio, and even then, not that great. So if I were to play an electric guitar, I can be technically correct, accurate in how to play it, but it's going to sound terrible, right? My rhythm, timing, phrasing could be off. The tone choices, no dynamics, no expression. I can be overusing a correct technique, and ruin everything. So if I'm just being completely analytical, it might not fit for that device or that musical instrument. Or if I was creative enough, musically creative, I could make music. I could use experimentation, unconventional or unique techniques, improvisation, all these things in expression, and I can actually make music. So that's the difference where we have you can be technically correct, but not really do justice for your case and find the actual evidence that you need. And maybe you can put a little bit more creativity with some unique techniques, unique thinking, and you could probably solve the case better than otherwise. So since we're talking about tools, I want to bring up not really a case study, but just an idea of when we throw tools at a case. And I think this happens quite often when we're new to this work, or it happens when we get a new tool. We want to use this new tool. We got training on it. We just bought it. Yeah, the license is running out before we have to pay for the subscription, renew a subscription. So when we have a case, we want to throw tools at the case, and we don't always do it with a purpose other than I want to use this tool. It's like buying a new sports car. I want to go drive it. I don't have anywhere to go, but I want to go drive it. I don't think that's a good idea. So this is a couple snippets from a much longer report. And I redacted just kind of to focus on the tools. The report is very detailed, but the point I want to make is about the tools, right? So in this particular one, we have Celebrite, Magnet, Belkosoft, Axiom, Elcomsoft. There was about a half a dozen more tools that were done, and all these tools were thrown at these devices. The lawsuit was basically deleted text messages and emails. That's about it. So we know what the objective was. Is well, they're deleted, and the examiner just threw every tool at it, just threw one after another, one after another, one after another. And the last part of it was, well, we threw all these tools at it, but we weren't told to find out who did it. Right? That wasn't the object of this. But however, the civil litigation was who deleted these text messages, and this is the defense side of the report. So it's not a lot of the only creativity in this type of case is let's be creative and throw all these different tools at this, and yet we're not going to touch or talk about who may have done it, even though that was, of course, the justice of the case. Being creative, you really have to look at the whole picture. So this is not the whole picture. This is just, yes, everything was deleted. We know it was deleted, and then we used all these tools to confirm that everything was deleted. But we didn't use any tools to confirm who could have done it, who was holding the device, nothing on the outside of the box, and no creativity there. They were analytically, technically correct. This tool said it was deleted. Another tool said it's deleted. Therefore, it's deleted, and we're not going to go any further from that. I think as a DFIR examiner or analyst, you are an investigator too, because you're uncovering evidence. You're recovering files that were deleted, maliciously, intentionally, and you're putting together a story that someone is going to use to make a decision. Right? So you're investigating something that happened. And I think with that example I just gave, part of that is who did it, right? Because if we do all the W's, who, what, when, why, and how, right, and we take away the who, That's not an investigation. That's just going through the numbers and excluding something that you don't want the numbers to show. So we're going to talk about picking the tool that fits the task. Now, in this case here, they picked so many good tools that fit the task, but they didn't use an investigative mindset of, okay, now we know what happened on the devices. We just don't want to talk about who actually did it. So when I talk about picking the tool that fits the task, I'm a tool hound, a gear hound. I got a tree of dongles. I love tools, freeware, you know, commercialware, all these tools. I write a couple little things, you know, that I use, but I always have to tell myself, okay, I'm not going to throw everything at this device. And yes, I'll reflect back on starting out when I first started out, kind of a long time ago. The general consensus of how forensics was throw the drive on the machine on Friday, let it run over the weekend, and process everything, right? Data carve everything, index everything, come back in the weekend. Hopefully it didn't crash. And now we have a ton of data to go through, and we didn't have to do that. Right? So, and now it's different, right? So I still try to get in the mode of what specifically and I'm looking for. And the way you can kind of analogy is these two vehicles here, one's for racing and one's not for racing. So the tool is kind of the same way. Is do you need a tool that targets a specific thing really fast and easy because you have a time limit, deadline, some exigent circumstances? Well, you'll pick the race car. You'll pick the one that just goes in and gets just that. Or do you need the whole device data card, you know, for everything? You need the whole device indexed. Well, then you have to have a bigger tool to do that. So you pick the right one, because if you pick the wrong one, if you buy your fancy tool, the fast one, and you try to use it on a case that doesn't fit to what you need, you're going to be having a lot of wrongs in your case. And vice versa. Sometimes you can't use the fast car. You got to use the RV for the cross country. So creativity in DFIR, I want to stress again, I want to keep stressing, it's a complement of the systematic and validated approaches. It's going to complement everything that you do systematically. And I kind of look at like a forensic tree where we have the legal boundaries, you know, the base of the tree or the bottom of the tree, and on top of that we have our investigative integrity, which stays within that legal boundaries. We have our systematic processes, validation, and innovation, which would be the creativity. It's got to fit within the boundaries, at least definitely the legal boundaries. Now, some innovation killers, besides our own internal killers of I'm not creative, you know, I'm not innovative. Especially if you're, say, in a briefing for an operation or collection or whatever it may be, and you're given ideas, if you start hearing some specific words, these are what I call innovation killers, negative thinking. Things like, oh, we tried that before. Or we don't have the resources, or we already done it this way, or it's too radical. When you're hearing those things, that's coming from somebody who is killing creativity. They don't want creativity, they're killing it. And like, for example, we tried that once before. I've heard that. I'm sure you've heard it often as well. We've tried that once before in a specific circumstance. Well, maybe this circumstance is different. Maybe this scenario is different. So maybe it will work on this one. So you have to kind of counter this negative thinking with some positive thinking. It's ahead of the times, it's behind the times. All these different things are killers of creativity. And I guess one example I can give is, again, when I started a million years ago, we were pulling the plug from the back of the machine to do no harm, right? Preserve the evidence. And I don't know who came up with, but there's evidence in memory. and we're losing so much of it there. So someone came up with that. They were creative and thought, you know, maybe we should, instead of pulling the plug back in the machine, we have maybe megabytes at the time, but we definitely have a lot of gigabyte now of evidence and memory. That went out of the bounds of the analytical way we've done things. Someone was innovative with an idea, and of course had tools to capture that. So that's just one example of the way we do things now, and 5 years from now it's going to be different. Just like 5 years ago, it was different. So we're going to be behind the times or ahead of the times. I think we have to be creative. That's the only way we're going to keep up with that. Okay, there's this saying here by Francis A. Cartier. There's only one way in which a person acquires a new idea. It's by the combination or association of two or more ideas he already has. And this is kind of it, it makes complete sense. One idea can't solve the problem, and another idea can't solve the problem. But both of those ideas can give inspiration to solve the problem. So if you look at say a software developer, in forensics, they have an idea, of solving a problem, but it's not going to solve the problem. And there's another idea, and that kind of gives them an impetuous of, what, I wonder if I could write a tool that can actually do this, because they get inspired by two ideas. This is the same as if you're, say, in a briefing to make a plan of how we're going to do this collection or how we're going to investigate this case, whatever it may be. And your team leader or the project manager, they have their ideas in their head. One idea of their idea is A, we're going to do this. And if you give them an idea of what about B, and they're going to take that A and combine it with B and come up with C. And that's how people are inspired. So there's not really any research that says you get inspired without having at least two other ideas already presented to you. So that's how we get inspiration. The point of that being is when you're making plans, you have an idea, look for other ideas or reflect on other ideas to inspire you to a good idea. So just think of any idea that you've ever had. I bet you can tie them to two other ideas that you put together. That's creativity. That's being inspired and being creative. If you ever know this very famous statement, okay, Houston, we have a problem here with Apollo 13. Movie, I think Tom Hanks was in it. This was a very great example of creative thinking. So basically, the spaceship goes up, and they have some problems, right? And they have a limited air, limited energy, all these problems coming up. So the ground crew at the time was coming up with all these ideas to save the astronauts. They used a lunar module as a lifeboat. And they could only use what was on the spaceship. Right? And it's the same. I'm sure this happened more than this time, but this is the most famous time. So the ground crew goes, well, there's the inventory we have on the ship. The navigation system is broken. What can they do? Well, they can use the sun and the moon. They got to revise it in real time. Waste management's a problem. It's going to be cold up there because they got to turn off the power to save the power. So they have these lunar boots that they would wear on the moon to keep their feet warm. So they'd wear them in the shuttle and the spaceship. So dozens of other problems. All this was from creative thinking. There's another movie with Matt Damon, The Martian. Same concept of what he was doing with creative thinking. If you're analytical, you're going to miss a lot of ideas, right? Because if you're analytical and the navigation system goes out, analytically is that, well, we have to fix that navigation system, right? And that might not be the solution. So manual using Earth and Sun was a creative solution. So looking at it's like a mind map. That's an idea, and I'm going to be giving some ideas on how to be creative, especially if you're not feeling that you're creative. And a mind map is one of those ways where you have idea A and B, and you get C, and then that can expand more. So mind maps are a great way to start that creative process. There's other things you can think about being creative. Reverse engineering a problem. OSINT is a good way when you're stuck into the data to OSINT, open source intelligence information, to make corroboration of what you find in the box with things outside the box. Clues outside the box can help you with your analysis. That's inside the box. Write your own scripts. Every software program in forensics was designed by somebody who was thinking outside the box. They were creative, and they were thinking, well, I'm using this software, it just isn't doing what I want. So they write their own software, and sometimes they become very well known. I mean, FTK is another great example. That's from creativity. That's from not staying analytical and just using what you have. Analyzing metadata, all these different things of being creative, visualizations, gamifying, being competitive with let's say a partner or someone else who's working the case. Hey, let's see who can find the link file for us, whatever it may be. Using AI, I'm an advocate and against AI for forensics at the same time. And machine learning kind of in that same bucket. I think AI is an analogy of your creative brain, right? So if you remember what I mentioned about you could paint a painting, if I asked you to paint a painting, and if I asked you to duplicate it, it's probably impossible to duplicate it, right? If I ask you 2 + 2, and then a week later 2 + 2 is going to be exactly the same answer. AI is the same as the painting. You ask it a question, it's going to come back with a different answer next week, and a different answer if you ask it 100 times. So that's the negative on AI, but it's also the positive on AI. If you're stuck in your case, you could ask AI some questions, generically, not putting your case online. Some generic questions. I've done I have a GPS in a car that was involved in an accident. What can I do? And AI can give you some questions, and you can say, I tried all those. What else? What else could I do? So AI, I think, has good and bad points, but it is good for creativity. Of course, crowdsourcing is another idea to get creative. Now, I want to talk about the rules of the creative thinking road. There are some rules, and I'm not going to go over all these definitions verbatim, but these are important to know. And I do notice that in our field, we try to avoid legal knowledge because we like playing with tools. We like finding the data. We like doing those things. But there are some things we need to know. We need to know the laws because those are binding and they're enforced by a controlling authority, like a state or a city or a country. There's some laws we have to stay within those bounds. Regulations, there are rules or directives maintained by some authority. May not be a government. We have policies, could be a government or your organization. We have rules. It's kind of understood as regulations or principles. SOPs, they're instructions for completing a task. We have protocols, correct conduct and procedures. We have guidelines. Guidelines are kind of advice. And then we have best practices. And that's best practices. Basically, this is the most effective way that we have found to do things. And we're going to talk about those with an analogy of a roadway, right? So let's say the foundation of DFIR, that's be like your law, right? If you veer off the foundation of DFIR, you're going to go off a cliff. Your case is going to be violating. You could be arrested potentially by violating someone's privacy, search and seizure, unauthorized access, all those things. So that we have to stay on that road for that. Now we have the laws. We talked about the laws. That's like your speed limit sign. If you speed, here it says 20. If you go 40, there's a consequence. You could get a ticket, for going speeding. However, there are some exigent circumstances that maybe these rocks are falling on the freeway there or the highway, and if you don't speed up, you're going to get killed by a rock. So you speed up, you can violate the speed limit. You're still within the road, right? You understand what I'm saying? You're still within the foundation of DFIR, even though you violated the law because life or death. SOPs, that's your lane dividers. You want to stay within those lane dividers, but again, if a let's say a deer jumps in front of you, you might have to swerve across the line. So it's not like it's bound by law. It's just bound as a guidance, right? Regulations, kind of guardrails to keep you from breaking the law, from going off the road. Best practices, that's like your GPS in the car, or or a road sign that says, hey, you might want to turn left, it's faster. You don't have to follow the best practice. It's just saying, this is what we found to be the best practice. You may come up with a better best practice. So again, it's just a advice and guidelines. Again, that's kind of like your recommended approaches. Here's some guidelines on how to handle this. Again, if you veer out those lines, if it's articulated for a good reason, and then you're fine. Just don't want to get off the freeway, right? So when we put all that into this sphere of where we can work, we kind of want to stay within those very narrow guidelines and everything, right? But sometimes we do have to veer a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right, because the SOPs might not cover what we're doing. The best practices might not cover what we're doing. And if you look at best practices, that's based on what we know today. Or we go back to pulling the plug from the back of the machine. That was best practice. That was every computer, pull the plug. Whether it's on or off, just pull the plug, right? And now that's not best practice. That is a practice. And it's best practice for certain situations. But, it's not the same as it was, 10 years ago. And 10 years from now, today's best practices are not going to be the same either. So you can cross these lines as long as you can justify it, right? But you can't cross every line, right? There are that outer boundary of the laws without some serious exigent circumstances. And I would give one example of, let's say, kidnapped child, and you know the child is being driven away, and you have a device, and in that device, there could be evidence to save that child, right? But you don't have a search warrant. Well, do you wait for a search warrant and then have the child be gone forever, or is that exigent circumstances that you can try to find the evidence, and save the child? So that's what I mean by there are lines that you can cross when it's necessary. So the reasoning for all this, right? You really need to know what the lines are, laws, rules, regulations, SOPs, and when to stay in that lane and when you can veer outside of it. And I've seen this, personally, where the SOPs are written and people will stay within those SOPs no matter what, regardless. It's personally, and I want to give too graphic of an example, but there's a case where we had to go. I said we got to go outside the SOP because it's not going to work for this. And others are saying we have to stay in the SOP as if it was law, and it's not. It's guidance, but we have exigent circumstances here. So you just need to know where the lines are, and what the boundaries are, what the goalposts are, and when you can veer outside of those. And creativity is where that comes into. So everything I've talked about, I want you to use it for good decision making, like in when, where, why, how, that sort of thing. Analytically, it's easy. We can easily turn on the program, and if we're looking for emails, we can data cart for emails. We can sort, search, export, do all those things. That's very easy. It's analytical. When it's creative, it's a little bit different. And creativity doesn't necessarily get covered by SOPs or guidelines or best practices. Creativity kind of goes outside the bounds of that. We can even look at like a live forensics. There was a time when there was no such thing as live forensics. We would never be on a machine doing live forensics. But people were doing it, right? Because they knew if we shut this down, whatever reason, encryption, business operations, it's active intrusion going on, all the different things. So live forensics is a thing now, right? There are best practices for live forensics when it wasn't before. So creativity is knowing when, why, and how, and you may end up creating some best practices. And it doesn't take a lot of experience to be the one that does that. My thought is creativity, innovation, they're nearly outside the lines all the time. It's just you're not going to have a lot of creativity when you're within that narrowest line, because you're kind of restricted from doing anything else. But I'm just trying to stress you can't go out the line if you justifying it. So we'll go some tips on practicing creative thinking. I've already talked about a couple, but there's a few other things I want to talk about that you can do from today. And doing these is going to increase your ability to think, creatively. It's going to improve also the speed of having great ideas, the speed of innovative ideas. It's also going to improve your speed and decision making on which tool to use and how to use different tools. With a creative mind and a creative investigative mindset, you'll probably be able to see different uses for tools that weren't necessarily the original design for those tools. I mean, we all use Excel, and I joke that it's a forensic tool because we all use it for everything, right? We make graphs, we do spreadsheets, look for patterns, we do all those things with the Excel spreadsheet. That's a creative use of a non-forensic tool. You can probably find a dozen more that you do that with. And with your forensic tools, you can probably find some ways that the tool wasn't designed to be used that way, but it works well when you put it to use that way. So one of the things is practicing lateral thinking. Lateral thinking is challenging assumptions. So if you're stuck within SOPs, right, and you're just stuck with it, you have to challenge, well, why do we have that SOP? And the SOP may be for a good reason that covers 90% of the things you're going to encounter, or 99%, but it doesn't cover this 1%. So that's when you challenge it of, yep, I understand what it's for, but it doesn't fit this situation. reframing the problem, thinking in reverse engineering the problem. And you can practice that with brain teasers, puzzles, quizzes. All those things can help you of better not lateral thinking, get rid of your analytical thinking by having actually think. Cross-disciplinary learning. This, hopefully everyone does this with the hobbies. If you study fields outside of DFIR, right, you can broaden your perspective, right? And when you learn about other fields, some of those solutions or ideas you can bring back in. So the way I kind of do this, if I'm working a case that's a medical case, I'm actually learning about the medical system, right? I'm looking for medical related data, so I'm going to learn about the medical field. So I'm learning about medical terms, the way medical system works, their processes and procedures, and some of those can go directly into DFIR. So if you're learning about more fields, including hobbies, those things can help your creative thinking as well. This is a revisiting old problems or old cases. This is a self-reflection, and I always find it kind of hard or painful to do. And this is kind of like an honest evaluation of yourself on your past cases, right? So I've had cases that lasted up to 14 years, one case, other cases several years. And when I look back on those cases, on tools that I used and how I worked the case, and if I read the report, I cringe sometimes. It's like, oh my gosh, why didn't I do this? And why did I do that? I could have done that much better. Or I spent 40 hours on that thing. I could have done it in 2 hours. And it's a twofold reason to reflect on those cases. One is to see how much you improved, right? Because you should have improved. The other one is to reflect on the tools that you used and how would you use the tools today if you had to do that case over again today? And the answer should be, oh, I would use these different tools and I would use this method and I'd be done in a third of the time. And I do a much better job. That's what it should be. If you look at your past cases and you go, that's the best I can do, right? Don't fool yourself that you can't do that any better. And that's it, because you don't want to feel like you're incompetent, right? If you're saying that, you haven't grown, and you're not going to be growing too much more. So anyway, when I look at past cases, I go, yep, I could have done it better. And if not, I haven't grown since then. Scenario-based training, tabletop exercises, CTFs, anything to practice thinking on your feet, especially if it's time-based, that's going to help you to think creatively, because you don't have time to be analytical. You don't have time to do a methodical, systematic approach. You have to come up with something on the fly and apply it right away, if it's time-based. So I'll give a personal example of creativity, improvisation. I had tried to be a narcotics detective, undercover detective at one point in my career, and I go through the interview process and I failed, and somebody else got picked. So the next time one came up, I think a year or two later, before that time, the interview came, I went and took a college class on improv, right? Comedy improv, acting improv, and I did that for a semester. And, what I learned from that was a lot of things that applied directly to working undercover, was thinking on your feet, thinking fast, being creative. And it really helped. It's one of the best classes I've taken for that job. And I believe it's carried over into the forensic world of being able to think on your feet, solve problems that other people can't solve just because they're not thinking fast enough. They're not considering other things that are in play that they have in front of them. Reverse engineering, just work at incident backwards. That's going to open your eyes up to some things that you can't see by looking at it forward. Just start at the end result and even ask, how could it have happened and how could it have changed, reconstruct the events, that sort of thing. New tools and skills, try new tools. I love tools. Every time a new one comes out, I'm grabbing it, and I'm trying it, and new skills as well. If there's something that I see online that says, how to do A, or how to do, and I've never done it before, I kind of want to know, even if it's something that I don't think I'm going to need to know right now. Learning that new skill is going to help me in some other situation where I go, you know what, I did learn that one thing that's kind of irrelevant, but it's one of those ideas that combine with another idea, and now I can actually combine it into one. So all those new skills and tools, I try to use them to give me ideas to solve problems that are analytical is not going to solve it, or if there's a time crunch and that sort of thing. So some key takeaways. Analytical thinking I think it's the foundation of analysis, right? We have to have the calculator, just the ruler. We have to do things that way. We have to be able to replicate, duplicate, validate, corroborate, verify. We have to be able to do those things from day one to the end. But creative thinking is outside of that. Creative thinking is going to solve the problems that analytical does not. And I mean, if you're in high level math, you know that you need some creativity and trying to put things together to solve mathematical problems. This is no different. We're dealing with people in cases. Every case that you have is tied to some person. Some person did it. Some person either created malware that created the problem you're looking at, or some person actually did the incident or the crime or whatever or they used the computer to commit a crime. So we have to look at it as it's not all 2 + 2 or 0 and a 1. It's actually a human is involved. And because a human is involved, calculators don't work that well to find out why that person did that. And like I said, even AI is not going to tell you, the answer to every question. It's going to be your brain that has the 10 quadrillion synapses per second that's going to solve that problem. And another quote from Albert Einstein, and he's got a lot of quotes, obviously, so is everybody, but on creativity, he says, creativity is seeing what everyone else has seen and thinking what no one else has thought. And I thought that's a pretty good quote that he has. And I've always said things when I say investigative mindset to see what other people can't see. And he's saying it a little bit more accurate, I think, is to be able to see what everyone else has seen, but you're thinking what no one else has thought. And I would love to steal that. I'm going to use it from now on forever, because that is what the investigative mindset is. It's you're seeing the same thing in front of you as this next person is seeing, but you are thinking differently. You're putting it together differently. You are interpreting it differently, and therefore you're going to be able to solve it differently, and maybe the only one to solve it. So let's talk about that one thing that you wrote down. I say this all the time, and if you haven't written one thing down, or even if you put a notepad on your screen or just a text to yourself, hopefully something that I said, you wrote it down, because that is really going to help your creativity thinking. It's also going to help your investigative mindset, because when you're physically taking note of something, let's just say a sentence that I gave that was 20 words or 15 words. If your note of what I said was only 3 or 4 words, you use some creativity in your thinking, you use some critical thinking and critical skills to take my long-winded sentence and put it down and then interpret it into something that you can remember, and you can write it on a piece of paper. And that's going to help you out on your casework. So with that, I appreciate your time for coming. Again, it says creativity and thinking. This is something that we don't really get this kind of discussion and training, because I think it goes outside of the rules that we live in. We live in those the rules. This is forensics. This is your tool. This is the case. Here's your guidelines. Stay in your lane and don't go outside that lane. And I just want to reiterate that every forensic tool that you use, every developer went outside those lanes. Every single one of them said, I think I can do it better, but I'm going to have to veer a little bit from what is commonly known today, was commonly approved today. So with that, I hope everybody got something out of this. And then you have some questions or?
Yes. Yeah, Brett, great. This was an amazing presentation. I did take some notes. I can't say I distilled it down to 4 words, though. I guess I got to work on my creativity in that. While we chat here and I read some of the comments that popped up, I'm going to pop up your polls, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Your poll questions. So everyone, these will be popping up here. So I'm going to hit the first one there. So the question is, what aspect of training do you believe will be most essential to maintain a consistent investigative approach in 2025? So I'll give you about a minute or so to answer that. While they're doing that, let me switch back over to the chat. So Tara said, hey, Brett, perhaps the word is cautiously creative. And in reference to balancing between the lines, the guidelines, the best practices, etc.
I agree, and I will change that slide. And that's a good point, Tara. Nice to see you. So that's a good point.
So one thing that I liked, and I got a thumbs up, I put it in the comment, was that road slide. Did you create that? Because I have never, like, that is one of those pictures where you see it and it's like that picture is perfect for what you were breaking down. It had all these things in a clear like the second I saw it, I'm like, oh yeah, I know exactly how all that applies. That slide is amazing.
Thanks. Yeah, put it together. Trying to find the best analogies for each one, and I think that came out probably the easiest.
Oh, well,
I was creative with it. How about that?
Exactly. Yeah, you put your lecture into practice. Practice what you preach. So I'm going to hit the next poll up, and then we'll talk about the results of the poll, and you can comment on that. So I put up the next one here real quick, and it's which process-related challenge impacts your ability to maintain consistency in investigation. So while they're answering that, Brett, let me read you the results of the other one. So again, what aspect of training do you believe will be most essential to maintain a consistent investigative approach in 2025? Hands-on training with new forensic tools and technologies was 38% of respondents. Scenario-based exercises reflecting real-world cases was 28%. Continuous education on emerging digital threats was also 28%. And then legal and compliance-focused training came in at 70%. Any comments on the results there that you want to weigh in on?
I think it depends on the person, their situation, what they're exposed to, what they have access to, the type of job with DFIR, their organization. So I didn't make the options easy, like A or B is right. I think I kind of wanted to make it that everyone's going to be kind of differently what they're exposed to. For sure.
So we've got a bunch of responses for the second one, but first I'm going to go back. I'm going to pop up the third one, and then we're Tarantinoing through these things. We'll go to the end, come back. Investigative mindset. What do you believe is the most important trait? Oh, let me post it first, and then so they can read along if they want. So investigative mindset. What do you believe is the most important trait or skill for maintaining an effective investigative mindset? So everyone, that poll is up now, and all the other polls are still there. So if you come in, you can go back and answer. So Brett, the previous one, which process-related challenge impacts your ability to maintain consistency in investigations? 15% said lack of clear standard operating procedures. 37% said difficulty adapting processes to new types of evidence. 30% said limited cross-departmental coordination and communication. And 18% said an over-reliance on outdated tools or methodologies.
Yeah, everybody's correct.
Yeah. You and I talked about this a while back in one of our conversations, was B, difficulty adapting processes to new types of evidence. And I'll shout out a blog post you wrote where you talked about we need to create our own standard operating procedures, our own standards, our own rules to follow so that it's flexible enough so that we can do the job, but sets the guidelines so that we're safe. Because if other people do it, I think B will become, B being difficulty adapting processes to new types of evidence, will become a lot more difficult if our community is not the one creating it.
Right. If we don't set the standards, somebody else will. That's inevitable.
Yeah. And again, everyone check out his blog for more information on that and other things, of course. Okay, last one. And then we've got to break to the next one. So investigative mindset. What do you believe is the most important trait or skill for maintaining an effective investigative mindset? 44% said analytical thinking and attention to detail. 41% said adaptability to changing digital evidence landscapes. 6% said strong legal knowledge and ethical standards. And 9% said effective collaboration and communication with stakeholders.
Yeah, everybody's right.
Those,
Okay, yeah.
you ask hard questions with answers that you're like, all of that, you know?
Well, I think the one thing I did get a point, like the 45% one.
Yeah.
Everyone who answered that one, they probably have good communication with stakeholders, right? And those with wanting communication stakeholders, they have good analytical thinking. So it all depends on who you are, and it's kind of showcases, I guess. Okay, I like to have this bucket more full because my other bucket is full. So it depends on who they are, your training experience, who you work for, that sort of thing.
I appreciate that insight into all these questions. Is if you're strong in one, it's going to influence how you answer. That's a great view. Well, Brett, I want to thank you again for coming out. This presentation was amazing. I dig it. And again, thank you. Last comment. You got 1 minute. That's what you got.
Well, those who have a creative mindset will be better than those who don't. So keep that in mind.
There you go. Succinct. All right, everyone. Thank you. And as this ends, you'll be pushed into the next one. Brett, thank you again. You're going to get actually just kicked out. Sorry. It's just the way the system works. But have a great rest of the day. And everyone will see you in the next session.
Thanks.